everyone, my name is Vicki Perkins. I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator with Alberta Parks and Kananaskis Country. In this short video, we're going to be talking about wildlife tracking. And I have to tell you, I love this activity. One, because you can do it anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are in the province of Alberta. This is an activity everybody can do. And like probably many of you, when we go outside to our natural areas and our provincial parks and protected areas, we often want to see wildlife. And sometimes we're lucky, we get to see them, but often it's really hard. Winter provides this incredible landscape because we have the tapestry of snow that is capturing movement patterns of all the animals that are active in wintertime and crossing the snowy world. So we're going to become winter wildlife detectives, and I'm going to help give you the skills to help you identify who is there. As we're trying to identify animals that we share the landscape with, I have a number of different tools to help you identify what they are. And part of it is actually doing some homework before. And that is like really understanding, where are you in Alberta? This is tip number one. Where do you live? Who do you share this landscape with? Do a little research. Alberta has, North America probably has about 500 different mammal species. And if you push it down to what might be active in Alberta in the wintertime, maybe 50 throughout the province. How many would actually be active where you live? And try to think of them in three different categories. What are animals that you're really likely to see? It's quite probable. For me, living here in the Rocky Mountains, I would expect to see a snowshoe hare. That's a track I see all the time. The second category you might want to think about are animals that you might see. So I might see a track of, let's say, a beaver. I might see a track of a mountain goat. And then the third category is, what are those tracks that are really improbable? For example, where I live here, it would be very improbable for me to see a sign of a swift fox here in the Rocky Mountains, or a pronghorn antelope. These are two species that call the grasslands of Alberta home. So do your research. What are animals that you're really likely to see in the wintertime? What are animals you might see? And what animals are really improbable that you will see? And that's going to narrow down the possibilities to probably, 20 or so animals that are really likely for your area. Okay, tool number two. How big and heavy is the animal? So without even knowing what animal you have, you can tell a lot just by looking at the track. If you compare the track to the size of your foot, you make a fairly large track. And typically, the larger the track, the larger the animal. Now there are some exceptions to this, because there are animals like the lynx that have this incredible adaptation of huge feet that allow it to disperse its weight on the surface of the snow, so we can travel on top of the snow. So it's not always the case, but as a general rule, the bigger the track, the bigger the animal. The deeper the track, the bigger the animal. And that also is going to help to narrow down that search of possible suspects. All right, tool number three. All animals have a preferred way of moving on the landscape, creating a pattern in their tracks. If you can't see a pattern, then you probably don't have a track. The wind can be a real kind of like Wendigo. It can be the trickster blowing snow on the ground, and it looks like you have a track, but really it's just a blob of snow. So first thing to really think about, do you see that pattern? And then you actually want to look, what do the tracks look like? What kind of pattern are they creating? And there's generally three types of patterns out there. There's diagonal walkers. And this is animals like humans, the deer family, the cat family, the dog family. And basically they alternate one foot and then the other. And it's often called diagonal walkers because you can see this diagonal that they create. The other thing to think about, if I drew a line down the middle, there's a midline, and the tracks are kind of equal on each side of that midline. The second one are ones that we call hoppers, and you're always going to see 4 feet. And these animals generally put down their front feet, they put their back feet in front, and then they launch, hopping. So think rabbits, snowshoe hares, a lot of our ground little mammals that are living in the wintertime, like mice and voles. And the third category are what I call bounders. And this is where you're going to see only 2 feet, 1 foot slightly behind the other. And this is from an animal that has what we call direct registry. So it's moving like this on the landscape, and it's really putting its front feet down, its back feet kind of go in front, and it pushes off. And this is animals, any animal that's in the weasel family will create a track like this. So your mink, your fisher, your martens, wolverines. So rule number 3 really is about looking for that pattern. Tip number 4. So once you've identified where you live in the province of Alberta and you've created a list of very likely suspects, and then you've kind of looked at the track to get a sense of, like, is this animal big or small? You've looked at the pattern, so you've tried to limit it down. Is it in the dog family? Is it in the weasel family or in the hopper family? Then you're ready for tool number 4, which is your guidebooks. And this is really to narrow down what really that animal is. There are guidebooks for different regions. For example, this one is here, Animal Tracks of the Rockies. So this is very pertinent to where I live. This one here, Winter Ecology Tracking Booklet, you can find this on Nature Source Portal, so you can download it. And it's just one that I made that shows the common animals for Kananaskis country. So if you want to find a book that's going to be relevant to your part of the province.
To use your guidebook effectively, you will need to take a few measurements, including how wide an individual print is and how long it is. 2 other important measurements include the straddle, which is measured from the outside of the left heel print to the outside of the right heel print. You can think of it as the width. And another measurement called the stride, which is measured from the toe pad of one track to the toe pad of the next track on the same side. And you can think of it as a distance between steps. These measurements are really important because when you use your guidebook, some tracks are going to be really similar. However, the measurements will clearly differentiate between animals.
So now that you know what your track is probably maybe the most fun part, and that is go follow your track. What is the story of your track? What is your animal doing on the landscape? Is it walking? Is it running? Is it going to the bathroom? Is it eating? Was it chasing something? I don't know. But go follow your track for a little bit and find out what story it has to share. So hey everyone, I'm super excited. I got John Pashkowski, who's our park ecologist in Kananaskis country, and I'm just going to ask him a few questions. So John, as a biologist, why is tracking such a great tool for you in the work that you do?
Sure, tracking is a really cool tool because it allows us sort of insight as to what animals are doing, how they're moving through a landscape, and we do so sort of unobtrusively, so we do it after the fact. So you can go out on the landscape and collect all the tracking data, and it helps us inform some management decisions.
Cool. So we've been talking about with the kids, like how tracking is fun. You can do it anywhere in the province. But how, as you as a biologist, how do you go about gathering track data? What does that look like?
Yeah, tracking is always fascinating. You can sort of get a lot of information, but from different animals. But in order for us to sort of track them over a long period of time, like we've been doing it for decades, we set up systematic track transects, which go up the hill. Sometimes they're like 2 kilometers long. We break those into 50-meter segments, and we go and we measure what's been happening in every 50-meter segment year after year, and we do it multiple times during a winter.
Awesome. So if you do any of the learning extensions, you might be involved in a line transect, just like John does. And typically, I think you do that, like just after snowfall? How long do you wait before you actually go out tracking?
So we have all the winter transects set up, and about 24 to 48 hours is ideal, and we go out to those transects, and that gives the animals enough time to move through the area, and it gives us a bit of a timestamp of when those animals went through.
Awesome. So it's a tool, and you're gathering this data. So how do our managers actually use tracking data that you guys collect so that we have areas like this where people can go out and ski and snowshoe, but we also provide the habitat for animals because we know it's their home and they need essential space to live?
Sure. Well, the wildlife tracking data really gives us an insight into what areas might be critical for wildlife. So if we see continuous movement of, say, wolves or cougars through a certain area, we want to identify those as really important for those animals, and we can adjust our human use patterns to better protect those and make sure that we have wildlife connectivity through those areas in the long run.
Now, I have a lot of biologist friends, and they always have those stories, the ones that they always remember. Is there a moment that you were tracking that you can share with everybody? Because, you know, it is super exciting when you get to follow these tracks.
Sure, it's really interesting because you're going along and you're really getting an insight into what that animal was doing for the day, and lots of times they really surprise you. One morning I was tracking a cougar, and it was still a little bit dark and nothing really going on, and I'm just kind of following the tracks through the forest. Then all of a sudden the tracks disappeared, and I started looking around, and then I realized the next track was about 5 meters away, and the next one was about 5 meters after that, and the cougar had gone from just walking into a straight run, and it was running downhill. And about 200 meters away, you could see where it had pounced upon a bedded deer, and it had killed that deer, and there was a blood stain in the snow, and you could see it dragged it downhill and hid the carcass under a big old spruce tree. And I left it alone at that point. But coming back to that area about a week later, I'd realized that it wasn't just a cougar alone. It was a cougar female with kittens. And after she had killed that deer, she had brought her kittens in, and they fed on that deer for almost a week and had a good feed. So it was just sort of a really interesting insight into the day in the life of a cougar, or a week in the life of a cougar in this instance, and her family.
Super cool. So you can see kill sites. You can see where animals have slept, where they fed. Well, thanks for sharing that story, John, and for sharing your experience with tracking.
Happy to do it, Vicki.
Thanks. So now you guys have a number of tools to help you become a winter wildlife detective, to go outside, to explore the winter landscape, and to identify some of the tracks that you might encounter. And now you get to actually identify who they are, who you share this landscape with, and have the fun of discovering the story that they'll tell you. So have fun out there.